great pleasure to be here. We're going to talk about what some might refer to as the acceptable face of the metaverse, augmented reality. There are lots and lots of discussions going on all over the planet about the metaverse, and I think we might even want to ban that word from our panel from now. It's a deletable expletive. The panel we have with me this morning, I think, is an excellent group of people to explore the subject of augmented reality. As you know, augmented reality has been a companion, if you like, to virtual reality for a number of years, but is beginning to gain momentum again. And like all these technologies, it goes in cycles, and there are moments of excitement and then sloughs of despond, as we know, and the Gartner hype cycle provides us with a perfect model for that. But the interest and excitement around AR has been growing in recent years, and very recently Niantic, which is probably the company leading investment in the content and platforms for AR, announced their new content platform, the Lightship, and my organization, Digital Catapult, has joined with Niantic and is running an acceleration program designed to encourage lots of companies to get involved in the development of content in an AR environment. But obviously, there are also lots of constraints. So we have a long way still to go, but the potential, the opportunity, the creative opportunities, the commercial opportunities are really outstanding when we look at what AR represents and what its potential might be. So here to talk about that with us this morning, three fantastically qualified people. On my immediate left, I have Suhair Khan. Suhair has a 10-year history at Google, where she was responsible for cultural and arts projects of all kinds around the world, globally. She is currently the chair of the studio Wayne Mcgregor, which is probably one of London's most leading edge dance stroke cultural arts fusion agencies and environments. It's hard to describe because it's such a combination of things, but a really exciting environment in which to experiment and to innovate. Next to Suhair is Alex Book. Alex is the co-founder of an immersive agency, Arcade. Alex spent his early years of his career, misspent the early years of his career in finance. He says, I'm quoting him now, not me, I'm not saying that, but he saw the light relatively recently and transferred his allegiances to the immersive space and is now running a highly successful agency in the shape of Arcade, who are working across sports, entertainment and the business space with a variety of household brands amongst their client list, and I think a really outstanding insight into where all this technology is going and how to use it commercially. And then on my right, on your left, I have the pleasure of introducing you to Ben Timmons. Ben is the Senior Director of Business Development for all of Europe for Qualcomm, a chip company that is probably better perhaps known in the US than it is here, I suppose, a little bit. But those in the know that Qualcomm drives a huge number of devices that we're all making daily use of. And the Snapdragon chipset is really the key to all of that. And so, as we know, when we think about AR and we think about the ways in which it might develop and go forward, one of the concerns and one of the things we have to overcome are some of the hardware issues. And so it'd be really interesting to hear from Ben. So as I say, we're going to talk for about half an hour, but then we'll open it to you, and I hope that you'll have questions for us, and that you will have sprung to life enough, and the coffee and the caffeine will have reached your innermost systems such that you'll be able to ask us some interesting questions as we go. But let me start, and Suhair, I'm going to turn to you first. And Studio Wayne Mcgregor, as I mentioned, is such an interesting fusion of choreography at its heart with Wayne Mcgregor, but obviously a company of all sorts of other people. What is it about AR that has got you guys excited?
Right. So Studio Wayne Mcgregor is the creative director of Studio Wayne Mcgregor, and it is at its core a dance company, but Wayne's philosophy is actually really about channeling the physical intelligence of each of us, which is movement through and from the body. And Wayne has worked across disciplines for many years, as you know, so design, architecture, music, and so on. And he's worked with us at Google quite extensively with technology. So he's pushed the boundaries of dance and engaging with machine learning in ways that very few creative individuals have been able to do. So for us to come to augmented reality and to think about new platforms and new mediums for creativity wasn't actually something that that was completely out of the box. And it's why we've kind of shifted in this direction. Of course, the pandemic, movement being restricted, dancers being in their own homes, and also performances being cancelled, I think has accelerated this interest in engaging with this space. So we are working now with Niantic. We've put out actually a call for applications for the Lightship platform, which is designed by Niantic. And the idea is to build a new kind of collective experience around movement and dance in, let's say, the metaverse, in augmented reality. We're focusing on urban environments, and what we hope to do is to create a collective, shape-shifting physical diorama of individual movements and dancers, where we're placing kinetic tags throughout urban environments, where players and users from around the world can come in and engage and connect. We're working on this with a crowdsourced kind of process through you guys, where we would put out a call to coders, technologists, dancers to say, how should we think about creating these sort of 2D tags that are movement-based throughout an urban environment? And then how do we think about reconfiguring that into a 3D dance? And then also, how do you take the idea of aesthetics? Because we've looked at this with machine learning and culture, machine learning and art. It can often be really ugly. It can get terrible reviews from a critical point of view. So can we make it beautiful? And then to go deeper, how to use the connected movement of your phone to push in new directions. So the idea is to bring this idea of the body, the physical, each of our physical autographs into this virtual space, and to make it something that feels fun and uplifting, but also is pushing the boundaries of creativity in ways that haven't happened before. And that's something that Wayne has always done.
And it's interesting because Niantic obviously are best known for Pokemon Go, and that was got millions of kids even now, and this is 5 or 6 years on, are still racing around capturing Pokemons, whatever they are, the plural of Pokemon is, in a variety of unexpected places around, all over the world. How do you, that was a sort of an early, really seminal kind of model. But when you think about something from a dance perspective, are you thinking about it in terms of the experience for those participating? But is there an experience there for others who are just observing all of this as well? How do those two things work together?
Right, so it's a great question. I think it's something that has to evolve. So Pokemon Go worked probably most beautifully because, of course, it had the technological infrastructure to power it, which is obviously vast, and it needed that. It was obviously founded within Google. But it allowed for an iterative process where users were able to connect with the technology in their own ways and make it their own. And what we're now at a stage where we want not just dancers and creatives to work with these platforms. We want to build on Lightship a platform where anybody can engage with if they're a creative, and to think about reformulating how the visual arts are presented in the virtual space, for example, and so on and so forth. In terms of people watching, I don't know, has anyone seen anyone playing Pokemon Go on the street? Yes, so it's probably weird. It's probably like you guys right now with your headsets and you're hearing your own thing. I don't know if it's going to look beautiful when you see it happening, because we're not assuming that there's going to be some kind of crowdsourced dance on the street. But that is the beauty of taking things into a virtual space, is that you're actually creating a community and an experience that, of course, exists in reality, but is able to share. In this case, it doesn't have to be an interest. All of us can find different ways of connecting with movement. And I think there's something quite liberating and freeing about it in a world where we're increasingly disconnected from creativity in schools and wherever else. So I'm curious to see.
Are we wedded to the phone in this context, though, or are there? What's your sense of the opportunity and the limitations of that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know, frankly, where, augmented reality will go in terms of the kinds of devices we're going to be using. I think the beauty of it, which we've talked about, is you're not behind a headset, you're not at a desk, you're not hiding. And that's one of the reasons VR probably hasn't become the sort of like seminal experience that everyone expected it to. We're already sort of attached, you're a little bit of a cyborg now, I think, and we can talk about ethics. Your phone is an extension of yourself in many ways. And we are pushing into new experiences and worlds. What I would say to counter that is you can be creative anywhere. You don't have to go to a theater to experience a performance. It's accessible. You don't have to pay for a ticket. You don't have to be a young kid, from maybe an underprivileged background walking into a museum and feeling intimidated. You have access and avenues in ways that you wouldn't have before, and also you can participate and maybe feel yourself in ways that you haven't done in the past.
Really interesting, and obviously the creative potential is still huge here, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
We're still at such an early stage of development of all of this. Alex, maybe I can turn to you. When you're working across a really interesting spectrum from very creative projects, I think you're working with the National Gallery on one project at the moment, aren't you? But all the way through to some really quite big household brands. What's your sense of the sort of the way? Is there a commercial appetite for AR? Is it just about hype and promotion, or is there something deeper than that?
I mean, you can guess which way I'm going to suggest that this is going, of those two options. But I think there's really good reason to believe that it is more than hype. It's not just about gimmick. And you know, when we look back across the evolution of this technology to date, bearing in mind that we're still in the absolute foothills of where we're going to end up, a lot of it, let's hold our hands up, has been relatively gimmick-led. I mean, even Pokemon Go. I think if anybody's played the game? Yeah, good, lots of hands. We perhaps turned off the AR functionality relatively early on in playing that game because it had served its purpose. You know, now I would actually argue that it served a really important purpose, which is that moment where we first see one of these creatures in our world is quite a profound sort of psychological change. So I'm no longer playing a game that's in my device, on my TV, on my tablet, on my phone. It's somehow in my world, and that's the magic of AR. We don't then actually need to persist with it in order for that that illusion to continue in our minds. So when we see that opportunity that AR can create and that psychological change, the impact it can have where content and experience is immediately liberated from these physical, flat, two-dimensional screens that we're so used to, and suddenly, even though we're still using devices to interact with them, they feel like they are all around us. Immediately you can see there's quite a profound shift there. And I think that's obviously what's got everybody excited about what AR is and where it will go.
Now, what about the sort of the more commercial, or perhaps the more sort of service-orientated uses? And we've talked a lot so far about the creative side, which is the most immediate, the most engaging aspect of AR probably. But there's a lot of people who are also looking at the sort of more industrial applications, looking at data overlays, text information, location-based. Is that something that you're seeing an interest in, and is that coming out of the business world?
I think it's important to remember that AR is a medium. You know, it's not something that exists in a sort of parallel universe. It's just a new way of accessing and experiencing content, which immediately means, just like any other medium, it can be applied to a million different applications, from the very creative, the very entertainment and game or play oriented experiences, through to things that are all about practicality and utility. You know, you've got one of the earliest examples of a sort of really successful use case for AR, in my view, is Ikea. You know, and that, you go back to 2013, I think was their earliest experiment with this, where they released something to the public that allowed you to place a piece of furniture in your environment. So suddenly it opened the opportunity to understanding what would fit and where it would fit. Very practical. You know, it's playful in its interface and in its interactivity, and that's something to be harnessed. But the opportunity to do something very practical with it is just as important. So I think it would be a mistake to sort of say that just because people are getting excited and yes, people who enjoy playing games are going, well, we can do all this stuff with AR, isn't it cool? It would be a mistake to forget that very, very practical utility approach that will be right for so many industries, from the medical profession to training, to all these areas that are coming up that are, you know, not about entertainment and play, but are about practicality.
Absolutely. Alex, thank you. Ben, I mean, let me ask you, I mean, Qualcomm is a company that's behind and is powering so much innovation through 5G and through a lot of AI applications. Is AR an area of specific focus for Qualcomm? Is it something that you're
so it is, yeah. I mean, it sort of depends on who you talk to in Qualcomm, but there's plenty of people who are willing to say this is the future of the company. This is unless we are able to deliver on the promise of AR, then the core business will wither. You know, this is something very important. Now, I don't think everyone believes that, but certainly the people that are engaged in the AR development very much believe that in the transformational nature of it. And as you say, I'm glad you introduced us as a technology innovator, because that's the way that we think of ourselves. I mean, from the outside, we look like a silicon company, but the way that Qualcomm thinks of itself is of applying intense engineering, research, imagination, and innovation to difficult problems. And that's exactly what AR is. It's a really delivering something, other than a simple application on a smartphone is a profoundly difficult problem. And that's exactly what we're working on. So taking all of the innovation that's taken place in smartphone, the way in which this extraordinary set of capabilities have been driven into this tiny piece of silicon, very, very low power consumption, and saying, okay, well, the next step to deliver really powerful AR devices is it's another set of generations of change of the same kind that we've already done, that we've got to do again. And that's exactly what we're working on. Now, we're not great, I don't think, at vision. In fact, if you ask someone in Qualcomm to say, what does metaverse mean? What does, what will this look like? We're always a bit puzzled to describe the kind of 5-year future.
Why are you puzzled?
Because I suppose in a way, because we've got enough to work on without thinking about, in a way, the millions of things that these capabilities could be used for. I was thinking about it while you were talking. We didn't need to invent Instagram to know that a really good camera on a mobile phone was going to be useful. So, even though we had no idea what it was going to be used for, we hadn't thought of TikTok when we started integrating good video capability. We're working on the underlying capabilities that we're pretty sure people will need. And sometimes this takes years. I mean, my favourite example on this is GPS, which we were integrating in phones long before smartphones existed. And it was only when the smartphone operating systems emerged and people started to use maps on their phones, all of a sudden GPS became, it was unthinkable that you wouldn't have a phone without GPS.
And obviously there's a sort of an iterative cycle, isn't there? I mean, we've had, we barely talk about Google Glass anymore, but obviously Google Glass was the first iteration of AR, and with all the attendant embarrassment and migraines and all the rest of it that it produced. But I mean, are you, when you think about that, and you learn, and obviously there's a huge amount of learning from that, the failure really of that innovation. Are you looking at specific devices and new devices as well that might
so yes, there's the technology vision is absolutely driven by a sense that at some point in the 3, 4, 5 year time frame, we will be able to deliver a pair of glasses which don't make you feel sick, which are light, which have got decent battery life, which can perform all of that functionality that we're expecting in AR. And we're on a road to get there. If you ask Hugo that runs the business, he says 5 years, and people are saying, "Oh no, don't say 5 years, Hugo. It's too long."
How long has he been saying 5 years for?
No, not that long. But there are critical steps in that. The first critical step, the really, really important, is to recognise that the glasses need to interact with some other thing, some other device, and the obvious thing is the smartphone. At the moment, if you look at the devices like the Nreal glasses, they're connected by wire. We've just launched a reference design which is connected wirelessly, and that for the short term is the physical form factor that we're working on. How do we make glasses that are connected wirelessly to a smartphone, probably with some processing in the cloud as well, which are good enough.
Fantastic. So you say you've launched a reference design.
Yeah.
What does that mean in terms of something actually being in production?
A device that we're building ourselves or having built for us, which is available to buy for developers. It's not a commercial device. You wouldn't use it.
Right.
It's too much of an engineering tool to be used as a commercial device.
Yet.
But it's a reference design that will allow two critical things. One is for developers to build and using the Snapdragon Spaces platform, which is another critical innovation, developers to build applications on a reliable, workable, meaningful platform with tools, with an SDK, with familiar engines, using OpenXR, etc., etc. And the second thing is it allows our traditional customers, hardware manufacturers, to say, okay, here are the pieces of technology that we need, the bits of silicon, the bits of processing to make this. Now let's us go and do the bit that we can do and try and make it look nicer, work better, feel nicer.
Amazing. I mean, is that form factor barrier, is that a critical barrier, do you think, Suhair? Is that going to unleash a whole bunch of opportunities once that simple concept of a wireless set of specs that you can wear that will give you that overlay?
Well, I mean, I think you probably know better. So I'd say two things. One is I heard that Google Glass is coming back, just FYI. So let's not call it a
never say never.
Yet.
Okay.
I mean, I think this is really relevant. It's like, you can start in one format, start in augmented reality, start in VR, and then you come back to the real world. And I wonder if we should be speaking to neuroscientists or psychologists around how we're translating these experiences in our minds now. So what does it mean to have, placed an object in the physical space and then just come back to it as an experience? And I think it'll be a lot more fluid than that. I actually can't imagine everyone walking around with headsets. And also, for why? And so there is the escapist element, and also the community element is there. So I personally, I have other thoughts on it, but I wonder if you've thought about it.
Interesting. Yeah. No, Alex, I'd really be, is it a groundbreaking innovation? Is it the watershed moment?
I think history shows that once science fiction imagines something, often the people who are the science fiction fans, there's a big correlation with the people who are then building the technologies, and we move in that direction. So the world of ubiquitous, wearable, in glasses as a form factor, that is going to come, that gives us all permanent access to a digital infrastructure, a layer of experience and content that's in the world around us, has been imagined, and I think we're on an almost inexorable path towards that. But I think what we can't predict, exactly as Ben was saying, is how these things end up being used, what they are used for. And there's going to be a million things that haven't been imagined yet that will influence the way that we embrace or don't embrace these things. Ben and I were talking beforehand about the fact that this assumption about glasses seems to ignore the fact that maybe not everyone likes wearing glasses. And that there's significant portions of the population who might choose to even have surgery, as I have, on your eyes, so that I don't have to wear glasses. So even as someone working in the industry,
you've got an AR overlay contact lens.
That's right. Yeah, bionic, exactly. But what I'm saying is that I think inevitably we're heading towards these glasses, and there will definitely be a freedom that comes with that. When we're designing AR experiences, we have to always be aware of the physical limitations of the mobile device. There are a few interesting ways that you can counter that, but fundamentally, if you're having to hold up a device, as they currently are, for longer than about 30 to 45 seconds, you're asking a lot of a user. Frankly, it's just a little bit difficult. Your arm starts to get tired.
Right.
And that's a really interesting constraint. What happens when the phone goes away, and if we have access to those experiences? Clearly, there is a freedom that comes with that. But I don't know if it will be, the magic moment where everything changes, partly because of the rate of adoption as well. So I think these things are going to coexist, and we're going to have to wait and see how society embraces it or not.
I mean, almost inevitably, there will be a trigger, whether a la Pokemon Go, something that will kick this into the mainstream. And as always, there's a sort of appetite for being the first to do that, but there's also an uncertainty about where that may come from. Let's just look at the flip side of this a little bit. There was in the period when Google Glass was being experimented with, and the sort of 2,000 or so people who walked around with this little thing installed, there started to be a set of questions being asked about privacy concerns, about the sort of some of the negatives of this. Are those things that, when you're talking to clients about AR applications, are those things that you're raising or they're making you aware of? Is there a consciousness of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you think about a dystopian future where technology is taking us, the only question is, well, which dystopia are we talking about? Because there's millions that have been imagined and that people are justifiably concerned about. And I think it's really, really important for those of us working in this industry to listen and understand those concerns. There's a danger in being too zealous about the exciting and fantastic opportunities that spatial experiences can offer, that you then feel like you're being blind to that, or you're sort of just dismissing these concerns. But whether from the concerns of becoming ever more reliant on these devices and the screens that are around us, which is a very justified concern, through to the full-on sort of Snow Crash style or Ready Player One style dystopias of a destroyed planet where we're escaping into VR. These are all fair concerns, and people do voice them. We do a lot of work in arts and culture, so that concern about over-reliance on screens in cultural spaces, I think, is a really interesting one. And it comes then down to sort of sensitivities and understanding, well, how can we work with that? How can we work with audiences, with commissioners, understand the rhythms, and understand ultimately the objectives? Most of our work has to be for purpose. It has to understand what it's playing towards, and that means that if your goal, as with our client, the National Gallery, if your goal is ultimately to engage young people with artworks, then the last thing we're trying to do is put a new barrier in between the audience and the artworks. So instead of that, we have to understand and design experiences that play to that engagement, that motivate that real world engagement, which of course is what Niantic is all about. They describe or talk about the real world metaverse as a sort of antidote to this idea of escaping into VR, and that's absolutely where we sit as well. It's about engagement with the real world.
So if you think about AR as one of the components of Web 3.0, the M word, however we want to think about that sort of future set of virtual spaces, one of the concerns that some people have expressed is that if you think back to the first .com era, it was an era of real disruption, of genuine subversive, that sense of being a cyberpunk, that sense of doing something which is countercultural. In the 20 years or so that's happened since, that all of that has become so mainstream and so corporatized that there is a concern, I think, for a lot of people, that actually where does that countercultural spirit come from? Where does that alternative perspective come from? Is that something that at Studio Wayne McGregor you're thinking about?
To say to group with Studio Wayne McGregor and just in generally more broadly, for sure. So I think you talked about the National Gallery. So I think the shift here with Web3 is that there is this creative movement and there's going to be partnerships. So whether it's with any kind of creative form or whether it's outside of that, we talked about the various Niantic platforms that are going out. Partnerships are going to be key, and I think there's going to be a shared collective responsibility now that's being built around what is creativity and how does it manifest. So from Wayne's perspective, there's a hugely empowering moment in saying we can use motion capture experiences, like use cameras, create these point clouds of data around the movement of a dancer as part of this collaboration with Niantic, and can we empower the dancer to own their craft and to monetize that over time? Same with fashion and NFTs. You have students at Central St. Martin's across the street who are being able to create collections in the metaverse because they don't need a physical space, they don't need the materials, they don't need that kind of cash. And so when you think about how you keep the creative energy going, how you keep a little bit of what is subversive, but also young people, the demographics of the world have completely shifted in the last 25 years. This is a global movement. Everybody has a smartphone. Not everyone has the glasses yet. So how do we allow these technologies to empower, and to use that word again, decentralize, right? It is a very powerful moment to say, can you take ownership back and define the space for us and with us? And there are going to be glitches along the way. You're going to have, in some cases, the high street, Bond Street being translated back into the metaverse somewhere. But also you're going to have these spaces that people are going to have complete access to and ownership over, where they're building their own shared realities. And so I think, keeping that conversation going is more important than anything else. But also I think there is an opportunity with Web3 to bring that values-based thinking, which maybe we didn't do 25 years ago because everything was happening so quickly.
Does that translate into a hardware question as well? I mean, is there a challenge here about open source and about enabling a wide range of interests?
Absolutely, there is, and I think unless that happens, unless people like us are able to enable a wide range of hardware manufacturers, developers, then the ecosystem won't develop. We'll end up in small groupings of single-purpose devices, which is largely what we've got now. If you buy a VR device, AR glasses of any sort, you're kind of stuck with that combination of hardware, and that's absolutely not the vision. So yes, for
that
us,
combination of hardware and whatever content happens to be available.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And for us, that's never going to work. In the end, we want to sell silicon software services.
But it's an
and we need a big universe.
Dilemma for you
It's
guys.
got to be open to do that.
It's an interesting dilemma, isn't it, from a business development perspective?
Yeah,
you could nurture very large accounts with a small number of people, or go much broader.
You probably don't know that in the pre-smartphone days, we had a system for delivering applications and an app store and a platform, and that was used in the CDMA world, which wasn't a wild success, and was completely subsumed once the mobile operating systems emerged. But despite the fact that no one except people pretty much who've worked at Qualcomm have ever heard of Brew, which was the name of the system, we've sold an awful lot more smartphones since then.
Right.
So on the whole, the open environment is better.
Is better.
It generated an enormous market, and we want to do the same with AR. So we've got to enable that.
We've covered a lot of ground, but I want to make this session quite interactive as well. So maybe we're going to pause there. There is a microphone here at the front, and a lady who's going to run around to anyone who's got a question. If I put my hand over the top here, I might see. So if you've got a question, stick your hand up. There's someone right at the back there. Yes. Can you stand up and tell us who you are and where you're from?
Very good. Yes, Charles Schrager, Schrager Ventures, investing in the white space of technology. That's what we do. I've got two questions for you. The first one is the role of gesture control and haptics on a go-forward basis. And the second one is who pays the developers. Is it this new data lake that's going to be derived from the devices, be it the visual data points or the gestural data points, that's really going to fund this?
Really interesting. Alex, do you want to have a grapple with that for the first one? That gesture control and haptics, is that a part of your agenda when you're developing ideas for clients?
Well, part of that, of course, plays back to these potential freedoms that new hardware is going to allow, and of course, that has a very immediate impact on experience design. So, the opportunities that are made possible once we start freeing up, both of our hands, will be really interesting. But we are already seeing, parts of that, obviously, lots of investment, lots of really interesting innovation in haptic technologies and gesture control, even on mass platforms like Snapchat or Instagram, where people are experimenting with these in quite playful ways, but where we're seeing the emergence of them as something that I think is going to become much more familiar. So, the opportunity there does feel quite profound, because it's that point where these digital experiences that are challenging people's understanding of what's real and what's not starts to make even more of a step towards authenticity and believability, if I can start to interact with them using what would be familiar in terms of the way that I manipulate physical objects. So we're really excited about where that's coming, but exactly the form it takes and what that translates into, particularly in the consumer space rather than enterprise, I think we need to wait and see.
Really interesting.
So just on gesture control, I talked a bit about the hardware. Most of the work that we're doing at the moment is about enabling technology on top of the hardware. Gesture control is one area of that. There are all sorts of other things, the recognition of the environment, things like occlusion, which are really, really important. What we're aiming to do is to develop all of those technologies, make them as good as we possibly can, so that developers don't have to do them themselves every time. So for us, gesture control is super important. I've no idea how it'll be monetized in typical Qualcomm fashion, but we absolutely know we need it.
Suhair, just that second part of the question, which is perhaps the most difficult one in some respects, but you alluded to it earlier because you talked about the sort of the data and the point cloud that you could create.
Yes.
And you talked about potentially enabling creators to monetize their own work.
Yes.
Is there a shift in the business model in here?
Well, I don't know. I mean, so on the device, I also wonder, because you said you're creating a virtual studio, right? So I think when you think of enterprise and consumer, I wonder if we're just going to have more spaces where people can go in and create. Maybe it doesn't have to be just hardware based, and if that becomes more part of how we're, I don't know, creating content, is just a lot more thinking about augmented reality and 3D spaces as a baseline model. In terms of how things are monetized, I don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, you're going to have someone who's incentivized to create content to be able to pay for it and to help to produce it. So whether it's coming down to film production studios or advertising agencies or tech companies, that's still going to be the case. But I do think there is now this whole new opportunity, as I was saying earlier, to create data, right? How do you create new archives using a new form of data? And can that be monetized down the line? I think it's absolutely possible, and it's important that we continue to consider it and record it and store it and share it. But how much we find that kind of democratization of ownership will really depend on how these industries evolve. And I think devices have a large role to play on it, because of course, the more you're able to access, creating these sorts of experiences on these platforms, but then who's building the platforms? And that's a whole other question. Who is Niantic? Who funded them? How did they build that platform? And is that possible to be democratized? I don't know.
Okay, excellent.
Right.
More questions? Yes, woman in the middle there. Can you tell us your name and where you're from?
Hello, I'm Devin Geary. I work at the West Midlands Combined Authority in the innovation team and have a background in the arts with dance specifically. So actually your answer just now leads on to my question. One of the themes that's emerged in the past couple of days is who has built the M word and who's in it, who's not in it, etc. So my question is around culture. When you are creating experiences, and you're looking at, you mentioned psychology as well in neuroscience, when you're looking at all of those perspectives in different cultural contexts, be that culture as in the set of norms, be that culture as in national culture, be that arts and culture, what are you thinking about at the beginning before you begin creating one of these experiences, so that you are accounting for how people from different cultures experience reality and virtual augmented reality?
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question. So in this case, of course, there is this idea that people can come and participate and create their own movement and space. And the beauty of Niantic and Pokemon is it's within the environment in which you exist. So if you're in an urban environment, you're engaging with the space that already exists around you. And I think by design, there is going to be that cultural connection and movement with it. I think where we have a gap, but that's a lot more creative industry specific, frankly, than tech, is how we own our own identity, our own culture, how we bring ourselves to movement, to dance, to the visual arts. And I think that has to be, an ongoing conversation anyway in the creative spaces as we get more and more global in our access and our reach, right? So if you are creating something that is in London, like a movement, if you're some kind of, we've called it this physical autograph, and you're placing it into the metaverse, if somebody in Tokyo is connecting with it or in Mumbai, do you care? What they see of you? It's movement at the end of the day. Does it matter? Is it as much about the connection as you're connecting with your body as much as with the outside space? So I think these are really interesting questions to unpack. But I do think more broadly, when you think about how we design technologies, where we bring values in and where we bring identity, all of these issues that you've referenced or alluded to, is going to have to change. We always design at the end. We say we want this to be accessible. We want it to be safe. We want people to feel comfortable with it. But shouldn't we have thought of that at the beginning or also along the way? Because as you guys have said, how we use these technologies will change. Nobody knows how we're going to use your glasses, in a few years' time if we're still using them. And so shouldn't we be reframing and revisiting as designers, as technologists? And in this case, there's the power of artists to do that. And I think they can ask those critical questions also. So maybe we design in a way that they can feed back into that. But it's a really interesting question.
Alex, let me ask you to address it as well. When you're thinking about the early stage of a project and you're working with a client on an immersive project, do you have to challenge the assumptions of the client around their own customer base?
Almost always. I think that there are universal learnings about how people are interacting with these technologies, but they are learnings, and we're adding to that insight all the time. We are, as I said before, in the foothills of this, both from a development perspective and from a societal perspective, and so often there either aren't assumptions, or those assumptions are based in some very traditional insights, and absolutely it's about challenging that. But I think when it comes to that sort of cultural engagement, exactly as Suhair says, the most exciting thing about this is a form of democratization and the opportunity to create these spaces which hopefully, and perhaps this is a slightly utopian view of this, create environments where people can express themselves and can connect, where previously physically it hasn't been possible, through distance, through accessibility, through for economic reasons, for social reasons. All these barriers have the opportunity to be broken down. Now, that's not trying to be blind to the challenges that obviously can come with that as well, as we're seeing in some of these metaverse environments at the moment that are, perhaps not the welcoming utopian spaces we wish they could be. But the opportunity for people to come, to engage, and to find new spaces to express themselves, I think is really exciting.
Excellent. Got time for probably a couple more questions. So yes, coming to you now, the microphone. Tell us your name and where you're from.
Martin Fincher, representing Gorilla in the Room, a software company developing, let's call it, Google Analytics for the metaverse. So exploring the monetization question a little more, interested in the panel's view on what is human attention, consumer attention in the metaverse, what is going to be a click-through, an ad impression, and how we're going to help brands and advertisers monetize in the metaverse to get the billions pouring in that we're going to need to create these great experiences.
Alex, maybe I'll start with you with that one. What's the new unit of currency?
Well,
are we down to NFTs and tokens, or can we do better than that?
I hope we can do better than that, but I think also what I really hope is that there is enough sort of institutional, organizational, societal memory of what we saw when that question was tackled in the early stages of the web. We went through a period, if anyone else is as old as I am to remember, where websites were just plastered with pop-ups and everything just cluttering your screen, because there was a very what looks now to be a very unsophisticated approach to trying to monetize this digital environment. Now, there's a risk, and people have brought this to life in quite interesting visual ways, where people have imagined that dystopian future where this AR glasses, all it does is give us the access to a three-dimensional physical version of pop-ups and flashing lights and click me and come here. I hope those lessons have been learned, because what, of course, we've seen with the web is that we've evolved, in most cases, to a more sophisticated approach where, from a consumer perspective, at the very least, we have a certain amount of control over the presence of those people who are trying to approach us and trying to monetize our engagement. When it comes to actually trying to put a kind of a sort of a currency on it, I think time is going to show, though, that the dominant model that we've got at the moment, where the value exchange between the ecosystem developer and provider and the consumer and the experiences that we get from it is it becomes a bit of a social contract. There are rightly lots of privacy and data concerns around that, but it seems the most obvious route, or the most frictionless route, is going to be to just a three-dimensional version of what we're currently seeing with the internet.
We're almost out of time, so I won't take any more questions. But I'm going to quickly get each of the panel to answer a very simple question, which is, if you look forward in the next 5 to 10 years and you think about AR, what's the most exciting application that you're looking forward to? Alex?
It's very easy to get excited by the hardware, by the devices moving away towards something that's hands-free and always on. But what sounds like a relatively boring answer, the thing I'm most excited about is normal. Could you try again? I get that a lot. It's over my phone saying I didn't understand what you just said. Oh, shut up.
Is that what you're looking forward to?
Yeah, exactly. Devices getting a bit smarter
under control.
That actually understand what I'm trying to say. Normalization, I think that it's underrated. At the moment, we're getting very excited by the glitz, the glamour of it all, but fundamentally, we're moving towards familiarity, normalization, where we start to see it everywhere, and it just stops being this augmented reality thing with this scary sci-fi sounding name, and just becomes part of experience. It becomes part of our lives, and I'm personally very, very excited about that.
Really interesting. Ben?
I think probably the transformation of the normal work environment. And I was struggling for analogies this morning and thinking about in my very first job, I was unusual amongst my friends because I had a PC on my desk. Now, it's unthinkable not to work on a PC now, and that transformation has taken place over years. And that same kind of transformation, I think, is going to take place in the world of work. So in 10 years' time, normal work will be unrecognisable. I think that's a pretty exciting prospect, that kind of further transformation of so-called office work will take place through XR technologies.
Finally, Suhair.
Yeah, I think it's an extension of how we live. We are now existing on multiple planes, and I think it's just one more of them. And you're going to see that across entertainment, across media, of course, across work. And I think we're going to have to be really open and probably a bit more relaxed about it. And I think just take a little bit of the hype and what's being pitched to us to disconnect from that, because these worlds will keep evolving. And it's actually quite exciting, in my opinion.
Fantastic. You've heard it here. It's going to be normal, folks. Alex, Ben, Suhair, thank you all very much for listening.